Hello, good people. It's Neo once again from the Overclocker magazine. Let's get right into it. What we have here is XPG's Lancer Blade DDR5 6400 kit, as the title says. This isn't the first blade memory set I've tested. The previous one was a CL36000 bin. You can check out that review in the links as always. I'll not rehash everything I said there, as we fundamentally have the same memory but in white and at 6400 CL32. It'll come as no surprise as well that these are Hynix ICs, but of a quality appropriate for the target market. That's to say, it's cost-effective memory, or at least should be in theory. The thing is, I have no idea how much this memory costs. It will be between $2,300 and say $3,600, or anywhere from $117 US. I genuinely cannot tell. That being the case, and assuming it's on the more affordable side of things, I'd say this memory is or should mostly be about the visual element. There's a number of reasons for this, but this 32GB kit is actually available as CL40 as well. While I would always say that go for the better timings, for this memory it actually doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why. In the previous review, I mentioned that the heatsinks were potentially holding back the overclocking headroom. This time, the heatsink combination with the ICs and operating voltage of 1.4 volts means you are dealing with a memory kit that won't do much more than what it says on the box. You could add more voltage of course, but the heatsinks will not tolerate it. And as you can see, 71 degrees during the stress test is what leads to failure at tighter timings or higher speeds, so the operating window here is relatively narrow. Fortunately, to its credit, the kit genuinely looks good. In fact, I'd say if you can get the 6000 CL30 kit in white, you'll have the best of the Blade series. I've increasingly as well become a fan of good-looking hardware, and I've always found XPG memory kits to be really good-looking. Take for example the Lancer ROG certified memory. I mean, come on. Honestly, it's just incredible and probably even more exquisite in the flesh. The Blade kit in white isn't of that pedigree, but yet it still manages to look the part. Against the whiteboard, it looks incredibly good, yet manages to look great as well in contrast to a black motherboard. Honestly, this for me is the saving grace of the memory. Just the sheer possibilities in styling and what I hope is a friendly price is what validates the memory for me. That being said, let's just move on to the benchmarks, which were done at XMP with tuned subtimings against the default DDR5 5600 of the Intel 13th and 14th Gen core CPUs. Performance testing was done on the ROG Z790 APEX, powered by the XPG Fusion 1600W PSU. Footage and thermal testing was captured inside the MONTECH King 95 Pro chassis with the MONTECH Hyperflow ARGB cooler, all powered by the MONTECH Titan Gold 1000 PSU, all of which is available at Woodware, of course. As usual, the first test is IDA64 memory bandwidth. From 5600 to 6400, you gain about 10 to 17 gigabytes a second of bandwidth. That being said, it's good to get over 100 gigabytes a second at a relatively low speed of 6400. Latency is next and is rather self-explanatory. The Blade memory reduces latency by around 5 nanoseconds. Without the subtimings tuned, you are looking at around 62 or 63 nanoseconds. The 7-zip benchmark in Benchmade shows a sizable gain in performance against the default settings, XMP proving well worth it once again. We then move on to Geekbench 3 memory score, and it's quite a surprise seeing a 16% gain in favor of the XMP settings against the default settings. We then get to SuperPi 32M. This is a benchmark that's always going to be memory sensitive, so the fact that the XPG Blade memory has a solid advantage over the DDR5 5600 settings comes as no surprise. We then get to Y-Cruncher 2.5B, where the XMP settings shave about 5 seconds off the compute time. Nothing extraordinary here, but it is something that is appreciated. And much like in Handbrake, which is the next benchmark of course, there isn't much difference here, just 3 seconds. But of course, depending on the job size, it could translate into hours reduced over a longer time frame or a larger project. We move on to Cinebench R23, where the XMP settings add about an additional 1000 points to the overall settings, and it's quite a bit in this benchmark, believe it or not. Last is V-Ray 5, and there's not much in it here. I mean, it's just 300 V-Rays a second more for the XMP settings versus the default 5600. So I wouldn't say here it's actually necessary. So whether you run the memory at default or XMP, it's not gonna make much difference in this particular benchmark. And that's it for the benchmarks. If you're wondering why are there no gaming benchmark, well, it's simply because there's hardly any difference between DDR5 5600 and 6400 for the most part. As stated before, this memory isn't about overclocking or for those wanting cutting-edge performance. For me, its appeal is to be found in the styling and hopefully keen pricing as well. A DDR5 6400 is pretty much ideal for any AM5 system, as the lack of overclocking headroom is not likely to be as much of an issue as it is on the Intel platforms. While I still believe the memory deserves much better heat sinks than it's getting, for the target audience, price point and purpose, you can't really fault the Blade memory. I'll reiterate again, if you want the white Lancer Blade memory, my money is on the CL30 6000 rather than the CL32 or CL40 6400 variants. Overall, some neat looking memory, and that hopefully comes in at a super attractive price. And in light of that, you will let me know what you think of the XPG Lancer Blade DDR5 6400 memory. Would you consider it? And if so, what's a fair price according to you? Either way, and as per usual, share, like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And until the next time, please do take care of yourselves and peace.